This episode of New Politics was released on the 25th of April, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
A 25% export tax could raise tens of billions of dollars each and every year to make our lives better. But instead, the government listens to lobbyists and vested interests. This is what happens when there's a lack of political courage. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And if you're listening in and haven't subscribed to our website at New Politics, you're missing out on half of what we do. There's regular articles and analysis of this strange world of politics. It's all free, and you can subscribe at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, if you do want to support us, it's just $5 per month at Patreon and Substack, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism. The debate about taxing the export of mineral resources and gases continues, and we just don't seem to be getting anywhere with this, David. We had a series of Senate Estimate Committee reviews during the week. They were discussing the merits of a 25% export tax on gas, and this should have been done 30 years ago, maybe 300 years ago, a long, long time ago. And here's Conrad Benjamin speaking at the Senate during the week.
Genuinely, I shouldn't be here. Punters Politics exists because I spoke about this issue and regular Aussies went, yeah, this doesn't only pass the pub test, this is outrageous, and we've been sold out because we shouldn't have issues with what we can afford. We should be looking at how we can invest in future businesses, how we can supply basic medical and dental to sort of anyone who wants it. This is the kind of country, how wealthy we are. Aussies know it, I know it, we know it. So when politicians tell us, and they're about to tell us, that we can't afford it, we know it's a lie, and this gas issue is the perfect example of how it's a lie.
Now, Conrad Benjamin also presents the Punters Politics podcast, so he's speaking a lot of good sense there, and it just goes to show that podcasters should have a lot more say in how government is run. And Dave, to be quite humble about it, I think we should actually be running the government, but that's a different issue. And here's the economist and former head of Treasury, Ken Henry.
I could make this very short and simply say, just do it. In the national interest, just do it and stop the crap that the Australian public have put up with for decades now in respect of the taxation of Australia's finite natural resources. But let me add a little of colour to that. The resources we're talking about here, gas, were created millions of years ago. They are part of the natural endowment that this continent provides for the people of Australia, including for future generations of Australians. The way that governments do this, acting on behalf of their citizens, is that they license third parties. In Australia's case, these third parties are almost exclusively multinational companies to commercialise the resources, and in most cases to export them overseas, because Australia's domestic usage of these resources is only a tiny fraction of the exports of these resources. So how do the Australian people get to benefit from that? Almost overwhelmingly, the only way the Australian people get to benefit from that is through the operation of the taxation system.
So the idea is pretty simple. Australians should benefit from their own resources, but instead of acting, the government stalls, it hedges its bets, it listens to the Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook, it listens to the gas lobby and other powerful interests, and in the meantime, the public misses out and doesn't get the funding that it needs for all the public services, for health, for education, for NDIS, for housing. But of course, we always have money for defence. And the same story applies to negative gearing. Treasury's testing the waters, doing their market research, and This generally isn't just about economics. It's about where does the political will come from? Where does the courage come from? And getting that political courage and being more serious about these issues. The Henry Review, well, that laid out the roadmap for all of these reforms all of these years ago, back in 2009. And if all of those reforms had been implemented at the time, well, we'd be in year 17 of this new system. Resources would be taxed properly. We wouldn't have had that Senate Estimate Committee meeting last week. The economy would be far more efficient and the budget would be about 40, 50, 60 billion dollars better off each year. So I think the message is stop talking about it, just go and do it.
Yeah, it's insanity. We essentially give our resources away to nobodies. Nobody ever really talks about the great entrepreneurial genius of our mining magnates. A lot of them have the very particular skill of being able to inherit fortunes. It's a rare skill.
That's actually true. It's very true, David.
But yeah, it's a valid one. And the Constitution's clear. And let's remember the Constitution wasn't set up by communist radicals. It was
Well, they were excluded from that constitutional convention in the 1890s.
Yeah. They were what we'd call today centre-right for the most, in fact, European liberals to conservatives. And they said if it's underground, it belongs to everybody. You got enough land that you could build a decent building. Under that, it belongs to everybody. At some point, it goes to Lang Hancock and other first-rate individuals like that. And by first-rate, I'm counting backwards.
I detected a little bit of sarcasm there as well, David.
Sucking the economy dry. And the only real response is to bring in a consumption tax that has failed. That would be like the Australian economy is like having a Ferrari sports car running on one cylinder or two cylinders. We should be in a much better position than we are. And we're in a pretty good position. We do live in one of the most prosperous countries in the world. But we could be even more prosperous with a proper social net, with a social net so good that you don't need the social net. 100% employment, for example. Greed is probably the most damaging human urge that we have. There's been a million cartoons of, yes, the earth is ending, but look at the value we developed for our shareholders. And that means too that if we need to pivot to another energy source, if we own the energy sources, we can do that. We're not threatening Reinhardt's fortune or Forrest's fortune, or because their fortune, if they're as good as they say they are, would be built on something else. But as a result, anytime there's a small hint of maybe petrol's not the best way to power things, we get, electronic cars are bad, EVs terrible. The batteries only go about 700 kilometres.
Oh, but essentially it's an ideological position that these people take up, because the 25% export tax on gas, that wouldn't affect those industries at all. And if it is implemented, and I'm hoping that it is, it would actually raise around $20 billion per year just from those key markets where all of this, or most of this gas is going, which is Japan, China, and South Korea. So that's a lot of money, David. I've estimated it is around 4 years worth of extra defence spending. And of course, there wouldn't be any money left over for health, education, or any other social spending. But sorry for being cynical about this, but if it's based around that Norwegian model of resource taxation, that's probably what you're looking at. But the issue here is that there's also the influence of the gas lobby and the energy companies that sort of push this into the background, or try and push this into the background. And the gas lobby is already working on a campaign to stop this from happening. Now, the Labor Party is in a very strong position federally, and it's in a very strong position in the mining state of Western Australia. But there's so much resistance to making this change. And there's a great deal of political courage. We've talked about political courage a lot today, but that's what's actually needed instead of the plodding along and Albanese talking about wanting the Labor Party to be the natural party of government. And just our regular reminder of what Albanese said when he first became the Prime Minister in 2022.
So I say to everyone here, all of my parliamentary colleagues, don't miss the chance. because you're not here for that long. None of us will be. And when you're sitting on the porch, thinking about what you did, you can either have a source of pride or a source of regret. No middle path. No middle path. Make it a source of pride. And
But essentially, that sort of stuff about becoming the natural party of government, that doesn't really mean anything. I don't care about the Labor Party becoming a natural party of government. I don't really know what that means anyway. I just want them to do something, implement the systems that need to be put in place, put in the reforms, and if you get voted out, well, then that becomes the cost of reform. But the thing is that you've created an extra $20 billion of revenue, maybe even a lot more, each and every year, and then you can use that next time you come back into office. And essentially, that's the cost of doing nothing. $20 billion a year. That's the cost of not doing anything about this. And that's pretty hard to ignore, that amount of money.
What the New South Wales Department of Education, for example, and maybe I'll say the Western Australian Department of Education. Hello to all our listeners in Western Australia. What they could do with $20 billion, what they could do with $5 billion. $20 billion divided by 6 states, going into health, going into education, going into infrastructure.
Or a couple of extra submarines that we'll never get.
But the point is that this is money that we could be using on so much good stuff. And we could even throw defence some of it, spread it around all the things that government should be doing. And by infrastructure, I don't mean Sydney roads, which take you nowhere and cost a fortune. We'll clear up the traffic by building another road. Wait, this road's busy too. We better build another road. Wait, this road's busy too. Oh, we better build. Where's this road going? Oh, you're only 17 kilometres away from the centre of town. Oh, great. The fear that people have, oh, they'll move overseas. Okay, good. Let them go. Someone else will come in and pay the tax because the system, it's just too good. It's just too good. Stare them down. The only person who managed to stare anyone down was Joe Hockey in the car industry, and that was disastrous. And he still goes around saying, and even people on his side of politics understood that it was another idiotic Joe Hockey policy that not only was doomed to fail, but did fail. So, yeah, I don't understand the fear. I don't understand the caution in this case.
And it was also pretty interesting hearing Ken Henry at the Senate Estimates Committee. He's probably over all of this sort of stuff, but he was the author of that far-reaching Henry tax review in 2009, and that was a very good report, David. I'm probably one of the few people in Australia that's actually read it, but it is a very good and comprehensive report. But
Henry was one of our very best public servants.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a fantastic review as well. But if that had been fully implemented all those years ago, and sure, it's not going to be implemented the week after the report comes through, but say if it was implemented over a 3 or 4 year period, that takes us up to 2013, we would have had 12, 13 years of a reform taxation system, including a reform of the way that these resources should be taxed, and all things being equal, and I know the world doesn't stay the same under different systems, but it would have resulted in a better budget outcome of around $80 billion per year, probably more. If we're being optimistic, it could have been $120 billion per year. And when you're looking at the national government debt at the moment, which is close to $1 trillion, that would mean that we would have no debt today, no national government debt today. If the Henry review had been implemented in about 2012-13, I'm extrapolating a little bit, but the general message that I'm trying to put out is that we would have been a much better off economy and society if the Henry review had been implemented. And the problem was that Labor just didn't have the Labor government just didn't have enough courage all the way back in 2009. They were just going through all of these other internal issues, and the Labor government implemented just 3 recommendations out of the 150 in the Henry review, and they were probably the worst 3 anyway. But you can't just take 1 or 2 things out of 150, which is a whole comprehensive project or process, and then hope that it's going to work. And these were poorly implemented anyway. I think it was mainly along the carbon pricing issues. Now, It's a little bit like the Sydney Harbour Bridge whenever it was opened, 1932. If all the political leaders in the 1920s just ended up having these endless committee meetings and kept on deferring decisions because they might lose an election, well, that gap of war would still be there. Probably never would have seen the Sydney Opera House built, and Gladesville Bridge would be the main icon of Sydney, and would have people standing on the other side, whatever it is, McMahon's Point and then Milson's Point, just wondering, oh, how do we get to the other side? Oh, what do we do now? And that's why you need your leaders with courage and vision. You work out what needs to be done, which is what the Labor government did in 2009, and then you go and do it, which is what they didn't do. And that's why you go into government, or that's why you go into politics. You go into government and politics to do things, not just sit there or sit on the porch and reflect about what you didn't do when you leave politics.
Yeah, there was a point where politicians, and you mentioned it before, Eddie, with Anthony Albanese sitting on the porch. What is your legacy going to be? And of course, a political career can go in all kinds of ways and can end in disaster through no fault of your own. The one thing that I would agree with Enoch Powell is all political careers end in disgrace or end in disaster or something. They all end badly. And I think that's pretty much true. And even if we point to the success figures like Menzies, the party had started moving against him. So he jumped before he was pushed. And so he goes. You look at John Howard, who was wildly successful electorally, loses his seat. Bob Hawke gets removed by Keating when he could have gone at his own terms, but he wasn't ready to go on his own terms when going on his own terms would have worked. On and on. It goes. So, you just wonder how some members of the current government are going to look back on their career. I would be looking at the loss of potential revenue and say it's wrong. Say it's $5 billion wrong. Oh, that's only $15 billion. Oh, is that all? Now
I would not mind having that in my pockets.
Yeah, it's just insane. And yeah, if those threatening to go overseas up and go overseas, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Keep in touch. But then we're not answering the email, so don't worry about it. If these things can be and should be fixed, those that leave aren't going to take the infrastructure with them because it's embodied. And if we have to pay them, okay, we're going to make a lot more money than the infrastructure is going to cost over the long term. If someone in government can explain to me, and two, before we'll have commenters say, well, this stuff isn't easy. No, I know that. It's not easy. And it will take time. But surely that investment in time is worth the return.
Oh, exactly, David. But it's also that thing about whether this is the point where we need that crash or crash through sort of politician, or we need quite a few of them just to take on these issues, address all of those too many vested interests that are out there in the property, energy and finance sectors. There's also the media framing of all of this as well. But you need some of those old style mavericks to roll up the sleeves to say, look, this is what can be done. And I'm with you on this. I'm not suggesting that this is all easy work, but some of it is. There's the political support for that 25% gas export tax, and it's really low-hanging fruit. It's so low-hanging, it's almost dropping onto the floor, and it's just, you don't even need to reach up to collect it. It's just there. And I think the government would get a big political boost out of this, but they just don't do it because it's all about managing those stakeholders. The stakeholders are not the electorate or the general public. The stakeholders are these vested interests that they go on to manage. And if a 25% export tax on gas cannot be implemented, well, we've just got no chance of doing anything else along these lines. And it's coming up to May 2026, David, which means that it's the end of the first year of this 3-year term. So 1/3 of this term is over. And we're only at the stage of talking about some of these issues in Parliament or in the Senate estimate committee room, and same with negative gearing reform, still at the talk and testing stage. Now, we might end up being very surprised, and a lot of these policies end up being announced at the next budget, which is coming up in a few weeks' time. I think it's March the 12th or thereabouts. And the point is that if nothing is announced at this next budget, then it's just none of this stuff is ever going to happen, considering that the second year of a term is the best time to introduce these far-reaching policies. You spend the rest of the second year bedding it all down. Then the final year of the term is to manage the politics of all of this before the next election. But
and hopefully you get the benefits, start to see the benefits of it in time for the election.
Well,
John Howard was a master of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But based on what we've seen over the past 4 years, that's not likely to happen. I hope I'm proven wrong about all of this, but it's just very unlikely.
They say that the stock market is run on two emotions, greed and fear. I'm pretty sure politics is run on two emotions, fear and ruthlessness. If you can win, you're going to win. But if there's a cost in it that you're not sure, you're going to be scared. And this is, of course, not to deny that the good people who run and get political seats and do a great job over a term or 3 or 4 or 5 or what have you. But all politicians have their eye on how painful is this going to be for me. And of course you want to protect your job, yada, yada, yada. But it's funny how the more fondly remembered politicians are the ones that at least pretended to have conviction and showed that pretension. Whereas the ones that bow to fear tend to be either forgotten or remembered for being timid and weak.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.